The last ferry from Amalfi. Close your eyes for a moment. Take a slow breath in, and imagine you can smell salt. And lemon. And something warm, like stone that has been holding the sun all day and is only now, slowly, letting it go. You are in Amalfi. Her name was Mara. She was the kind of traveler who kept a journal she rarely wrote in, who took photographs she sometimes forgot to look at later, who moved through the world with good intentions and a quietly overbooked itinerary. She had been in the south of Italy for 4 days, and in those 4 days she had seen churches, cliffs, ceramic shops, and the inside of 2 different taxi windows. She had eaten well. She had walked quickly. She had, without quite meaning to, turned a holiday into a series of things to get done. Today, she had meant to catch the evening ferry. The last one. The 7:15 from Amalfi to Positano. She had even written it in her journal, one of the rare times she'd used it, with a small arrow in a circle around the time, as if underlining urgency could make the world cooperate. But the world, as it sometimes does, had other ideas. By the time Mara reached the dock, her sandals clicking on the pale stone steps that wound down through the town, she could already see it. The ferry. Not approaching, departing. White and steady against the dark blue water, its lights reflecting in long ribbons on the surface of the sea, growing smaller with every second. She stopped at the bottom of the steps. She watched it go. And then, nothing dramatic happened. There was no despair, no frantic waving. She simply stood there in the warm evening air, one hand resting on the iron railing at the edge of the dock, and she felt the particular, deflating silence that follows a missed thing. The ferry moved on. The sea accepted it. The light faded to a small white, then nothing. Mara set her bag down on a low stone wall and sat beside it. Well, she thought. Here I am. Let me describe what she saw. The dock at Amalfi in the evening is not a busy place. The tourist boats have long since come home. The vendors who sell bottled water and postcards have folded their tables and carried them away. What remains is something quieter, truer, the docks as they actually are, not as they perform themselves for visitors. To her left, 2 fishermen worked with unhurried patience on a great tangle of nets. One was younger, perhaps 30, with rolled-up sleeves and a cigarette tucked behind his ear he hadn't yet lit. The other was older, moving slowly but without waste, each gesture exact, each loop of net handled with the ease of 10,000 repetitions. They spoke to each other occasionally in low voices. They didn't look at Mara. They were simply there, as they had likely been on evenings like this for years. To her right, a row of small wooden boats rocked against the dock in the gentlest possible rhythm. Tap. Rest. Tap. Rest. Their ropes made quiet sounds against the cleats, a soft, almost musical knocking that came and went with the water. And ahead, the sea. Oh, the sea! In the last light of evening, the Tyrrhenian was doing something extraordinary. The sun had gone, but the sky above the horizon still held a ribbon of pale amber that cast its color sideways across the water, so that the sea looked less like water and more like hammered metal, silver and bronze and deep blue-gray all at once, shifting with every breath of wind. Mara looked at it for a long time. She couldn't remember the last time she had looked at anything for a long time. The town behind her was winding down. This is a sound, if you know how to hear it. Somewhere up in the narrow streets, a shutter closed. Then another. The smell of cooking drifted down, something with garlic and olive oil, something that had been simmering a long while. A child called out to someone, a bright voice between the buildings, and then was answered, and then went quiet. A motor scooter started somewhere high on the hill, puttered, faded into the distance. And then it was mostly just the water. Mara reached into her bag without thinking and pulled out her journal. She opened it to a blank page. She held her pen above it for a moment. And then, for the first time in days, she didn't write a list. She didn't write a time or an arrow or a thing to accomplish. She wrote, "The sea looks like it's made of moonlight." She looked up. The amber ribbon on the horizon had faded. Above her, the first stars were appearing, faint and tentative, the way they always do, as if testing whether anyone is watching. Someone was watching. She didn't hear the old man approach. He was simply there, the way certain things in old places simply appear, a wooden chair pulled from somewhere, a small glass of something pale on the wall beside him, a face so weathered by sun and sea that it seemed less like skin and more like the map of somewhere. He was perhaps 75. Perhaps older. He wore a plain shirt, open at the collar, and he looked at the water the way you look at an old friend, not with admiration, exactly, but with familiarity. With the ease of shared history. He noticed Mara without making a thing of it. "Perduto il traghetto," he said quietly. It wasn't a question. Mara smiled, a little sheepishly. "See," she said. "The ferry. I missed it." He nodded slowly, as if this were not only understandable but, perhaps, inevitable. He looked back at the water. After a moment, he said, in careful, lightly accented English, "This happens. Sometimes the boat leaves. And sometimes that is better." Mara wasn't sure what he meant. But she didn't ask him to explain. Something about the evening made her feel that explanations could wait. That waiting, perhaps, was exactly the right thing to do. She turned back to the sea. The moon had risen, full and large and low on the water, and now the sea really was silver. Not metaphorically. The light lay across the surface in a wide, trembling path, as though something were walking toward them just beneath the waves. "It's beautiful," she said, almost to herself. "Yes," the old man said. "It always is. But you must be still to see it." Mara thought about that. She thought about how long it had been since she had been still. Not asleep, still. The particular stillness of a person who has stopped moving through a place and allowed the place to move through them. She had been traveling for 4 days, but she hadn't really arrived anywhere. She let that thought settle. She didn't fight it or fix it. She just let it sit beside her on the warm stone wall, like a companion she was finally willing to acknowledge. The fishermen worked on. The boats tapped their quiet rhythm. The moon rose another inch and the silver path on the water shifted, lengthened, seemed to reach further toward the distant horizon. Somewhere behind them, a cat picked its way along the top of a wall, paused to consider them, and continued on about its business. Mara exhaled, slowly, fully, and her shoulders dropped in a way she hadn't realized they'd needed to. "There you are," the evening seemed to say. "There you are." The old man's name was Enzo. He told her this the way people in small towns offer their names, not as an introduction, exactly, but as a quiet acknowledgement that a conversation had already begun and might as well be given its proper foundations. He didn't ask for her name in return, which somehow made Mara want to give it freely. "Mara," she said. He repeated it softly, the way Italians do, rolling the R just slightly, giving the word a warmth it didn't quite have in her own mouth. Mara. Like the sea at night. She didn't know if that was a coincidence or a translation or simply something kind that he'd decided to say. Either way, she found she liked it. They sat together in comfortable quiet for a while, the particular quiet of two people who have silently agreed that silence is not a problem to be solved. The younger fisherman had finally lit his cigarette. The small orange glow of it moved back and forth as he worked, like a tiny, wandering star. The older fisherman had begun to hum, barely audible, more vibration than melody, something without a clear beginning or end, a sound like the sea itself, circular and old. The moon continued its slow work. It was higher now, no longer amber-edged and heavy on the horizon but climbing toward its proper place, white and clear and very bright, so that the dock and the boats and the stone wall where Mara sat were all cast in that particular silver-gray light that makes the world look like a memory of itself. Softer. More certain, somehow, than daylight. Mara had stopped thinking about Positano. She had stopped thinking about her booking, about the morning, about the slightly frantic message she would need to send to her host. All of that had moved to a shelf somewhere in the back of her mind, still there, acknowledged, but not urgent. Not tonight. Tonight, there was only this. "You are tired," Enzo said. It wasn't a question. "Yes," Mara admitted. "But not in the way I thought I was." He looked at her then, briefly, directly, and gave a slow nod, as if she had said something he recognized. "There are two kinds of tired," he said. "The tired that needs sleep. And the tired that needs to stop." He gestured, very slightly, at the sea. "This one is good for both." Mara smiled. She drew her knees up a little and wrapped her arms around them, the way she hadn't sat since she was a child, and looked out at the water. The moon's path on the sea was extraordinary now. Wide and rippling and impossibly bright, it reached from somewhere beneath the horizon all the way to the dock, as though it had been drawn specifically for this moment, for this view, a road made of light leading from everywhere distant to exactly here. "My grandmother," said Enzo, after a while, "used to say that the moon does not shine on the sea. She said the sea shines, and the moon simply gives it permission." Mara turned that over in her mind. "I like that," she said. "She was a very wise woman," he said. "Also, she was sometimes wrong about things. But not about the sea." He was quiet again. Then he picked up his small glass, considered it, set it back down. "Can I tell you something about this place?" he asked. "Please," said Mara. He settled himself, a small shift in posture, a gathering of something, and she understood that what was coming was not simply information. It was the kind of telling that has been told before, many times, and has been made better by the telling. "A long time ago," he began, and he said it in the way that long time ago means in a story, not a date, not a century, but a distance, a depth. "There was a sailor from Amalfi named Luca. A young man. Good with boats, bad with directions." Mara laughed softly, and Enzo allowed a small smile. "He was coming home from a long voyage, months at sea, far to the south. He knew the waters. He knew the stars, most of them. But there came a night like this one, very still, very clear, when the current pulled his boat off its course, slow and quiet, the way the sea does when it has decided something. And he looked up and realized he did not know where he was. The older fisherman's humming had stopped. The dock was very quiet. Not lost, he was not lost. He knew the stars. He knew north. But he did not know where home was from where he stood. There is a difference, yes? You can know all the directions and still not know which one leads to the thing you love." Mara was very still. He looked at the sky for a long time. And then he saw a star he had never seen before. Very bright. very low on the water, to the northwest. Not a star from any map he knew. He thought, maybe a lamp on a distant shore. Maybe something else. But it was steady, and it was clear, and it was the only thing he was certain of in that moment. So he followed it. The waves tapped their rhythm against the boats. And it brought him home, Mara said quietly. It brought him home, Enzo confirmed. He sailed all night toward that light, and at dawn he saw the cliffs of Amalfi, and the harbor, and his mother standing on the dock, because mothers always know, somehow, when their children are returning. He paused. He told everyone about the star. He described it exactly, where it had sat, how bright, how steady. But no one else had ever seen it. The fishermen looked at him kindly and said nothing. The old men looked at the sky and shook their heads. There was no star in that position. Not by any chart. Not by any name. The sea breathed in. The sea breathed out. What was it? Mara asked. Enzo spread his hands in a gesture that managed to hold both mystery and comfort at once. No one knows. Some people say it was the light of a lighthouse that no longer exists. Some say he was confused, exhausted, and followed something ordinary without knowing it. Some say, he paused, looking at the water. Some say there is a star that appears only to those who are lost in the right way. Not dangerously lost. Not lost in despair. But lost in the way that means, you have been going too fast, and the world has gently removed your map, and it is asking you, very kindly, to look up. The words landed in Mara's chest. She didn't speak for a long moment. The lost who are ready to be found, she said at last. Yes, said Enzo simply. Exactly that. She looked up then, instinctively, the way you do after a story like that, and the sky above Amalfi was remarkable. Away from the lights of the larger cities, the stars here were dense and layered, piled up on one another in a way that made the sky look solid in places, like a cloth pressed through with light. She found the moon, bright and sovereign. She found a planet, low and steady, amber gold. And there, to the northwest, just above the line where the cliffs met the sky, a single star, very bright, very clear, sitting a little apart from the others. She knew, rationally, that it was simply a star. One of millions. Seen from a specific angle on a specific clear night, nothing more. But she looked at it for a long time anyway. Enzo, she said softly. Do you think he really saw it? Luca, the sailor? The old man considered this with genuine seriousness. He looked at the star she was looking at. He was quiet for long enough that she thought he might not answer at all. Then he said, I think he saw exactly what he needed to see, at exactly the right moment. And I think that is not nothing. I think that is, in fact, everything. Somewhere far up in the town, a bell rang, slow, resonant, the sound rolling down through the streets and the stairways and out over the water like something being gently unrolled. Once. Twice. It counted 9, then fell silent. 9 o'clock. Mara felt the number settle over her. Not with urgency, not with the faint anxiety that numbers on a clock usually carried for her. Just as information. As a coordinate. You are here. It is now. That is enough. Her eyes were growing heavy. She didn't fight it. The water continued its patient conversation with the dock. The boats rocked in their slow, dependable way. The moon held its place in the sky with the absolute certainty of something that has been doing this for a very long time and has no intention of stopping. Enzo refilled his small glass from a bottle she hadn't noticed before. He offered her none, which she found oddly correct. This was his ritual, his evening, and she was simply allowed to be near it. The younger fisherman had finished with the nets. He said something to the older man, something short and warm, and the older man replied without looking up, and the younger man laughed quietly and began to walk back toward the town, his footsteps easy on the stone. The older fisherman worked on alone. His humming returned, that same circular, sourceless melody, and now it seemed to Mara less like a song and more like a natural sound, like wind through a particular gap in the rocks, like water finding its level. She leaned back very slightly against the wall. The stone was still warm. Above her, the stars moved their imperceptible millimeters across the sky, as they had every clear night for longer than anyone had been here to watch them. The cliffs rose dark and massive on either side of the harbor, and the town above was mostly quiet now, its windows golden dim, its people settled into their evenings, their meals, their conversations, their slow drift toward sleep. And in the harbor below, the water rocked. And rocked. And rocked. Let go of the day, the sea seemed to say. You don't need it anymore. You carried it well enough. Set it down now. Mara's breathing had slowed. She wasn't asleep, not yet, but she was in that soft country just before sleep, where thoughts lose their edges and the body stops pretending it isn't tired, where the line between yourself and the evening becomes pleasantly unclear. She thought of the sailor, Luca. She thought of him on his boat in the dark, looking up, finding that one steady light. She thought of how it must have felt, not the relief of being found, but the moment just before, the moment of deciding to trust the light, of turning the boat, of letting go of confusion and simply moving toward the thing that was certain. She thought that she understood something about that, sitting here on this warm stone dock, on an evening she had not planned. She had missed the ferry. And something, the sea, the evening, some quiet and unhurried thing, had been waiting for her here instead. The harbor had grown very quiet now. Not the quiet of emptiness, there was still the water, still the old fisherman and his endless, patient humming, still the occasional soft knock of rope against wood, still the breathing of the sea as it moved in and out of the harbor the way it had moved for 1,000 years before any of them were born, and would move for 1,000 years after. But it was the quiet of a place that had finished its day. The quiet of a town releasing its breath. Mara sat with her back against the warm stone wall and her knees drawn loosely to her chest, and she was somewhere between the world and the place just beyond it, that soft, borderless country where sound becomes texture and thought becomes color and the body finally admits what it has known for hours. You are tired. And that is allowed. She wasn't sure how long she had been sitting there when Enzo spoke again. Time had become difficult to measure, not because she had lost track of it, but because she had simply stopped needing to. His voice was very gentle. The voice of someone who has learned that the right words, spoken quietly, carry further than the wrong ones spoken loud. You know, he said, my father used to say, there are some evenings that the sea keeps for itself. It does not put them in any calendar. It does not announce them. It simply makes them, when the conditions are right, and offers them quietly to whoever happens to be present. He paused. Most people are not present. Mara heard the words from somewhere warm and slow. They arrive the way good words do when you are close to sleep, not as ideas to be turned over and examined, but as something simpler. As comfort. As a hand on the shoulder saying, you are in the right place. I think I am present, she said. Her voice was softer than she intended. Slower. Yes, said Enzo. I think you finally are. The old fisherman had stopped humming. Mara opened her eyes. She hadn't realized she had closed them, and saw that he was done. The nets were coiled and stacked with the neat economy of a craftsman who has never needed to hurry. He was pulling on a jacket now, moving with the unhurried grace of a man who has learned that everything takes as long as it takes and there is no use in rushing any of it. He glanced toward where Mara and Enzo sat, and gave a single slow nod, not to her specifically, not to Enzo specifically, but to the evening itself, perhaps. To the dock. To the continuation of things. Then he walked away into the town, his footsteps fading up the stone steps, and the harbor was quieter still. The water was extraordinary now. In the deep of the night, with the moon at its height and the last of the harbor lights reflecting in long, trembling lines across the surface, the sea had become something else entirely. It was no longer silver, it was deeper than that, richer, a dark luminous blue-black that seemed lit from within rather than from above, as though the water itself were the source of the light and the moon were simply its reflection. The boats rocked in it like sleeping things. Their ropes made their small, patient sounds. Tap. Drift. Tap. Drift. Each wave arrived at the dock with a soft exhalation, a sound like a sleeper's breath, easy and full and entirely without urgency, and then drew back, and the next came, and the next, and the next, all of them exactly the same and all of them entirely new. In, said the sea. And out. In. And out. Mara's eyes were closed again. She was aware of the stone beneath her, warm and solid and patient. She was aware of the salt in the air, the way it softened everything, the smell of it, yes, but more than that, the quality of the air itself, heavier and kinder than inland air, as though the sea had pressed something gentle into it for the benefit of whoever happened to be breathing. She was aware of Enzo beside her, his quiet presence, the small sounds of his glass, the way he occupied the evening without disturbing it. She was aware of the star. She didn't open her eyes to look at it, but she knew it was there, that bright, particular star to the northwest, the one that sat a little apart from the others. She could feel it the way you can sometimes feel a candle in a dark room without seeing it. A warmth. A steadiness. A something. She let herself imagine, just for a moment, in the soft place where imagination and sleep are almost the same thing, that she was Luca. That she was on the water, the dark water, and she had been moving for a long time without knowing quite where she was going. That she had been busy and certain and purposeful for so long that she had forgotten to look up. And then the current had shifted, gently, and her map had gone quiet in her hands, and she had looked up and there it was. One light. Steady and clear and entirely certain of itself. This way, it said. Not urgently. Not with alarm. Just simply, calmly, the way a lighthouse speaks, not demanding that you come, only making sure that you can find it if you choose to. This way home. She let her head tip back very slightly. She let the weight of the day, the hurrying, the timetables, the beautiful exhausting forward motion of a life lived at full pace, she let all of it become heavy, heavier, and she let the warm stone hold it. She let herself be held. Mara. Enzo's voice. Soft as the water. She managed. You can hear it? She listened. And there it was, distant at first, more felt than heard, a low and steady thrum beneath the sound of the waves. A vibration in the air. Then closer, and she could hear it properly, the gentle, reliable sound of an engine moving through still water. The sound of something large and unhurried making its way across the dark sea. A light appeared at the mouth of the harbor. White, and steady, and moving slowly. The ferry. She opened her eyes. It was beautiful. She had seen ferries 100 times, they were practical things, useful things, boats that moved people from one place to another and thought no more about it. But this one, arriving in the deep of the night across a silver dark sea, its lights reflected in long broken lines across the water, its engine a low and soothing rumble that she could feel in her chest, this one was something else. It moved into the harbor with the unhurried confidence of something that has made this journey so many times it no longer needs to think about it. It simply knew the way. It simply came. The water parted gently for it and closed again behind it, and the small boats in the harbor rocked in its wake, a slow, spreading rock, like a sigh, like the harbor breathing out. The ferry slowed. Its engine dropped to an idle, a deep, rhythmic murmur, patient and warm, like the sound of a sleeping giant, and it settled against the dock with a low, soft sound. A door opened somewhere. A rope was thrown and caught. And then it was still. Still and present and entirely, solidly there. Enzo stood, slowly, with the care of a man whose bones remember many evenings. He straightened his shirt. He looked at the ferry, and then at Mara, and his face held something she didn't have a word for, not quite a smile, not quite sadness, but something in between, the expression of a person who has watched this particular scene play out many times and finds it, still, quietly moving. "Your boat," he said. Mara didn't move immediately. She looked at the ferry, its lights, its stillness, the gentle way it sat in the water as though it had always been there and was simply waiting to be noticed. She looked at the harbor, the moon, the dark shapes of the cliffs rising on either side. She looked at the star. Still there. Still steady. Still a little apart from the others. "Enzo," she said quietly. Thank you. For the story. For all of this." He waved his hand in a way that somehow meant both it was nothing and it was everything at the same time. "Thank the sea," he said. "I only sat here." She smiled. She reached down for her bag, but slowly, without urgency, as if she had finally learned, in the space of a single evening, what it felt like to be somewhere without immediately preparing to leave it. She stood. The harbor air was warm around her, salt-soft and full of the smell of the sea. "Will you?" she began. "I will sit here a little longer," Enzo said, settling back comfortably, as if this had always been the plan. "I usually do." The walk to the ferry was only a few steps, but she took them slowly. The dock was quiet beneath her feet, the stones smooth and worn and warm even now. The boats rocked their small rocking. The ropes tapped their small tapping. The sea breathed its slow, enormous breath. She stepped aboard. The ferry received her without ceremony, a gentle shift in the deck as her weight settled onto it, a soft creak of the hull, and then stillness again. She found a seat near the low windows at the side, and she sat, and she set her bag down, and she looked out through the glass at the harbor. Enzo was a small shape in the darkness. She could just make out the pale of his shirt, the slight angle of his face tilted up toward the sky. Watching stars, or watching nothing, or watching everything, it was impossible to tell, and perhaps there was no difference. The ferry's engine began its slow deepening. The sound moved through the hull, through the seats, through the soles of her feet and up through her whole body, a deep and steady hum, warm and rhythmic and entirely without hurry. Like a heartbeat. Like breathing. Like the sound of something alive and reliable and carrying you gently. The rope was cast off. The water began to move. Mara leaned her head against the cool glass of the window. Outside, the harbor slipped quietly past, the dock, the wall, the small rocking boats, and then they were out of the harbor mouth and the sea opened up around them, wide and dark and shining, the moon's path stretching ahead of them across the water like something being unrolled just for them. The lights of Amalfi receded slowly. She watched them go, the warm scattered gold of the windows, the white of the church, the dark shapes of the cliffs, and she felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. Not happiness exactly, though it was close. Not relief, though it was close to that too. It was the feeling of having been somewhere fully. Of having let a place actually touch you, rather than passing through it like a door. She had missed the ferry and the ferry had brought her here, to this, to Enzo and his story and the fisherman and the star and the dark beautiful sea and the sky so full of light it looked like something poured, and now the ferry had come anyway, as it always would, as it always did, patient and certain and entirely unconcerned with the schedule she had written in her journal. The world had not cooperated with her plans. It had simply offered her something better. The engine's hum was very steady now. The boat moved through the water with a slow, rocking motion, forward and gently down, and the sound of the sea against the hull was a soft and constant shushing, like a voice saying shhh, 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 over and over, kind and unhurried. Her eyes were very heavy. She didn't fight it. There was nothing left to fight. The darkness outside the window was full of stars and she could see them reflected in the surface of the water below, so that she was surrounded on all sides, above and below and in every direction, by the same quiet, constant light. As if the world had folded itself around her and was holding her, gently, in the middle of everything. She thought of Luca one last time. She hoped he had slept well, that long ago night, after he had found his harbor. She hoped he had gone home and sat at a table and eaten something warm and looked out at the sea from the safety of dry land and felt, as she felt now, the deep and wordless satisfaction of having arrived. In, said the sea. And out. The stars on the water drifted. The engine breathed. The boat rocked, forward and gently down, as patient as the tide, as steady as the moon, as old as the water and the stone and the towns built into the cliffs that have been watching the sea since before anyone knew what to call it. Forward and gently down. Forward. And gently. Down. Mara slept. And somewhere behind them, in the harbor of Amalfi, an old man sat on a warm stone wall and looked up at the sky. And the star to the northwest burned bright and still and a little apart from all the others. As it always had. As it always would. For every traveler who missed the ferry. For every tired person who finally, at last, looked up. Good night.